In the pantheon of RPGs, there are a few well-known greats: Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age, The Elder Scrolls, games everyone is familiar with. Beneath them you have the cult classics such as Gothic, Neverwinter Nights and Greedfall. But what of the games beyond even those? There are huge swaths of games in the unknown regions, never achieving the quality, or at the very least popularity, of their better-known brethren, but a lack of overall quality does not mean a lack of redeeming quality, and it certainly doesn't mean that they are not worth talking about. Developed by Polish studio Reality Pump, themselves the in-house development branch of German publisher Topware Interactive, Two Worlds is one of these games. Released in 2007, if Two Worlds is remembered, it is remembered for its proximity and comparison to Oblivion. This is unfortunately a comparison setting it up for failure. While its ambition may have been an equal match for Oblivion, its budget surely was not, and as such, neither was its level of polish. While this lack of polish shows up throughout the game, from its melee combat that feels simultaneously stiff and floaty, to its wonky voice acting and stilted script, if you take a shot every time you hear the words verily or forsooth, you likely won't make it more than an hour. But overall, I'd say its biggest problem is split between two connected issues: guidance and level scaling. A good example of these acting in tandem to create an uneven experience comes early on. In the first village you're likely to come across, you can find two quests pointing you to a village to the west. One asking you to collect an item from a merchant there, the other just asking you to check in, since they haven't received word in a while. This is good RPG design. Having a few quests pointing you to important locations means the player is more likely to come across them, and thus can be guided to good areas for their current level. The problem is, even if you've completed every other quest in this starting village, and a few more you can find along the way to your destination, once you arrive, you will find the village full of a large number of glacial orcs, far more powerful than you can manage that early in the game. When the game is giving you guidance to a place, there's never any way to tell whether it's going to be appropriate for your current power level. Level scaling in games can be a tricky business. If you strictly scale enemies and encounters to the player level, then you end up with the entire world feeling homogeneous. But if you don't have any level scaling, like Two Worlds does, you need to be careful to make it clear where the player is intended to be at any given level. Otherwise, the player can end up wandering between areas without ever finding one that provides a satisfying level of challenge. Early on in Two Worlds, you are much weaker than most of your opponents. Early levels can require a lot of trial and error, finding quests you can comfortably complete, but the player's power level will quickly outstrip opponents after a few hours. Without even being particularly completionist, in the northern sections of the map, you can find yourself overleveled to the point that you stay ahead of the curve for much of the rest of the game. This is less pronounced with more martial character builds, where the gradual increase of equipment quality slows the player's advancement, giving you more time before areas become unsatisfying and forcing you to move on. With a magic build, however, it can be almost comical. The magic system has a large number of spells to play with, and a modifier system that, in theory, allows you to keep most spells somewhat viable throughout the game. In practice, you can shift from being underpowered and struggling within every fight to not struggling with a fight for the rest of the game with the discovery of one or two spells. All of this is exacerbated by the respawn system. Scattered around the map are health and mana shrines. Standing near one will restore the respective stat, but dying respawns you at the nearest health shrine. It doesn't respawn enemies or even reset their health, so early on your best tactic is to just find one of these shrines and camp it while whittling away at enemies. It leads to a situation where fights can often be frustrating, but are very rarely challenging, since you can just hack away at the enemy bit by bit without fear of death. However, such loose guidance opens the way for the player to explore on their own, and this is where the game really starts to shine. If you return to that ransacked village at a later level and push a little further west, you come upon the snowy mountainside those glacial orcs came from. This snowy biome isn't used anywhere else in the game, and its inclusion shows what a sense of ambition that I really admire about Two Worlds. There isn't a whole lot to do in the area, a few points of interest, orc campsites mostly abandoned, a small group of giants nested amongst some rocky canyon, various wildlife scattered around. There are no quests which actually take place in this zone, and really no point in visiting it besides curiosity. But when exploring digital spaces, I often find curiosity is reason enough, and if you're curious enough to visit this seemingly empty patch of map, you are rewarded with a unique area to explore Unlike anything else in the game, a less ambitious game, perhaps even a more polished game, would not have included this comparatively empty zone, but its inclusion adds to the sense of adventure, and if you do find it early, primes the player to explore seemingly barren corners of the map in the hopes of finding something new there, an impulse that is rewarded by the game more often than not. This sense of ambition to create something large and complex is felt throughout much of the game, only overridden by the sense of it not living up to the developer's ambition. The main quest is relatively short, though somewhat open-ended. There are a few introduction quests to introduce you to the basic setup, namely that your impractically dressed twin sister has been kidnapped by a group dressed in the latest Sauron chic. They want you to collect a series of 5 relics. You'll be told the location of one, a general location of a second, and where to find an informant for the rest of them. This first piece has a great setup. It's held in the treasury of the Karga clan. They used to rule the north until courtly intrigue led to House Skeldon taking over. Since then they have been in rebellion. Do you help the Karga clan to gain access to the relic, or do you side with House Skeldon to track down the rebels? Fantastic setup. Here's the catch. As soon as you start the quest, the location of Karga's hideout is marked on your map. It takes a whopping 1 quest to gain enough reputation with them to let you inside to meet their leader, at which point a simple fetch quest lies between you and the relic. Kind of a letdown. There are in theory plenty of quests around to help either side, chances to act as a sleeper agent. You can see a really engaging setup here, but unfortunately it didn't have enough time or budget to live up to its ambition. Each of the remaining 4 relics has a similar sense of not living up to the original intended design. The second one works best. Initially you're told its vague location, somewhere near a village, though if you meet the informant first he'll tell you its exact location. But if you go straight to the tomb it's hidden in, you'll find it locked. You have to go to the village first and perform side quests until one of the chains leads you to someone with a key before you can get into the tomb and grab the relic. This is again pretty solid quest design, with the flaw being that, like most of the game, there's really no way to be sure if you're around the right power level. If you were completionist up until this point, you'll steamroll it. If you weren't, you're prone to get steamrolled. The 4th relic also falls into this problem dramatically. Held in the Orc capital, in the temple of the god the relic is meant to be able to resurrect, it's guarded by an unsurprisingly large number of orcs. There's a questline A Zone Over, which upon completion can help you dramatically reduce their numbers and make it a more even fight, but it's likely you've already gone and slaughtered them all by the time you even find that quest. The 5th is arguably the most tragic. It's again very clear the intended path to get the relic. You're told it's somewhere in the desert, protected by a dragon. Like the snowy mountainside earlier, this desert is a unique zone, though unlike there, this one has more actual content. Egyptian-style ruins, scattered sands, and small tent villages offer the only refuge. Eventually, some of these quests in these camps will lead you to a dragon whisperer. He'll tell you that the mighty albino dragon that has been harassing the other desert dragons and stealing their eggs. He asks you to find its lair, somewhere across the mountains to the south, within a burnt forest. Finding a pass in the mountains, wandering the forest to find the lair, taking the relic and returning to the dragon whisperer, this could all be very compelling adventuring. The problem is, if you spoke to the informant, you get the exact location of the relic on your map. No need to even visit the desert. The dragon's not even in the lair, just wander in and grab it. Again, it's a problem with guidance. It's too vague as to when you should go places, but often too exact in where you need to go. Despite having a questline that leads you to one of the primary objectives in the game, you can entirely skip the desert, which is a real shame. The desert isn't that big. In truth, the only large zones in the game are the plains that make up most of the centre of the map, but the sandstorms and topography of the zone make it feel larger than it actually is. Most of the zones are like this: the glacier, the burnt forest, the volcano, the coastline, the hills to the north, even the bamboo forest in the south of the map. They all have some way of blocking your sightline outside of the area, making it feel larger. Combining this with the long sightlines and relative emptiness of the centre of the map, it manages to create a fantastic sense of being a large and varied world, where one minute you can see clearly for miles across forested plains, and the next you're lost in a desert. The actual geography of the world doesn't always make a lot of sense, but exploring it still invokes a sense of wonder and drives you to explore it. It's not always mechanically valuable to explore, but even zones untouched by the main quest will have their own character and characters to quest for within. That bamboo forest I mentioned earlier houses the third relic. It's held in the town of Ashos, which has somehow been untouched by the marauding orcs south of the map's central river. I really like this part of the game. Much of the world is what you might describe as standard European medieval fantasy, so to suddenly find yourself in a bamboo forest infested with giant insect men, with a completely unique Asian-inspired town at its heart, is a wholly unexpected bit of variety to the world. It's even got a unique culture to it. The people of Ashos are all suspicious of outsiders, and won't talk to you unless they're a trader. Even beyond the architecture, the canals and statues of snake men really set the place apart from the other towns in the game. It is certainly not an authentic depiction of Eastern culture, more a mashup of aesthetic elements that you might expect from a Polish developer, which is unfortunate. I love a bit of authenticity, but I can forgive this for the variety it adds to the world and the sense of genuine surprise it brought when I first came across it. There's only really one questline here, a winding quest with a few branches that takes you around the town and some areas beyond. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, it's also completely broken. I may be wrong. It may be that there is some combination of variables by which the quest works, but I have never been able to find Hoko Sayuri's sister. She has apparently disappeared inside the temple, but I could never find her in there. The temple is the home of the snake men depicted in the statues around town. It's also the location of Yathalan's eye. The townsfolk claim this artifact is what protects them from the orcs. They seem to be right too, as it is one of the relics you need, and as soon as you grab it, every quest in the area fails. Leaving the temple with it, the townsfolk have been slaughtered and the orcs fill the streets. It would be quite the story beat, but there's no consequence beyond the area, and no sense of it really changing anything. It goes entirely uncommented for the rest of the game. A shame. There's a great sense of mystery to the town. Who are these snake people? Do the people know of them, or are they equally in the dark? Was the mayor really a werewolf? These are questions you won't get answers to, but it hints at a great deal of lore that someone must have put a lot of thought into. This lore that goes nowhere is frequent throughout the game as well. The dwarves used to inhabit the hills to the north, but then they disappeared behind their walls. Now they're sending out mining parties and suddenly hostile when they were once tolerant. The orcs have united behind a prophet, promising the return of their dead god. And who are these strange armoured figures hanging around in the many towns in the game? They dress like warriors who capture your sister, but in white instead of black. The worst of this unexplained lore comes as part of the main quest, though not until right at the end. Literally the very end, it drops a huge amount of world building about gods and ancients in the conversation before you choose your final boss and subsequent ending. And to be completely honest, I've never been able to understand any of it. Getting all the relics you travel to gain your sister's release. You are of course double-crossed, though the exact nature of the double-cross is more interesting than I would have initially given the game credit for. The sympathetic servant Gandahar you have been dealing with for much of the game, who helped you to come up with a plan to free your sister, was really the mastermind behind it all along. It's not a particularly complex beat, but it's not badly executed. At least, it wouldn't have been if the cutscenes played properly. The game has always been somewhat prone to bugs and performance issues, but the fact that the few cutscenes towards the end of the game never seem to play makes the sudden wrapping up of the plot even harder to follow. They're just loose video files in the game's directory, so you can always go and watch them later, but it's certainly not an ideal solution. At this point the game's nearly over anyways. Basically only 3 enemies lie between you and the final sudden cut to the main menu that was meant to be a cutscene. One in one of the 5 large towers that have mysteriously sat around the map all game, then Gandahar's second in command who guards the gates to the dead city, and then your chosen boss. In one ending you side with Gandahar and your sister becomes a god and you stand menacingly on the god's old coffin with them. In the other you defeat Gandahar and time resets to before your sister was kidnapped. To be completely clear, I have absolutely no idea why this happens. It doesn't make any more sense with context, and what context there is difficult to follow, as I mentioned. I've never been quite clear on who Gandahar's faction is, who the paladins who oppose him are, or what any of the cosmological jargon he spouts before the final encounter means. Though it does, again, all point to a setting that someone was very serious about, but unable to truly bring to fruition. It really is a shame the game falls apart so quickly towards the end. True, it had barely been holding itself together for much of its runtime, but I always wish it had held on just a little longer. It's not a big issue in the grand scheme of things. The sequel doesn't take either of these endings as canon. I'm only going to touch briefly on the sequel here, Generally, the game is more polished, combat works better, mechanical balance is more careful, and you are guided through the main quest more clearly, as well as power progression being better overall. The outfits of the female leads haven't got any more sensible, but you can't have everything. Overall, Two Worlds 2 is a better game than the first, but it never clicked with me, because the more linear nature and smaller, island-based world gives it far less variety and stifles the sense of exploration I loved about the first. Ultimately, Two Worlds isn't a great game, but it isn't a bad game by any means either. It's certainly no classic of the genre, but a game doesn't have to be that to be worth playing. It would be a shame to forget it entirely, or to let it exist only as a negative comparison to better games. As it exists, on its own merits, it is an unbalanced and uneven experience, but also a varied and ambitious one. It may not always give you a good reason to explore, but if exploration for its own sake is enough for you, there may be something worth your time in its world. Thanks for watching.